This week, we're doing something a little different, and I'm excited to share it with you. I recently had a chance to sit down with Robert Kerbeck, author of the book Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street. In our conversation, he tells this fascinating story of his career as a corporate spy and what it was like to be an actual imposter in the workplace. He also talks paradoxically about his career transition to corporate America after that role and how the innocence and honesty that he brought to that position ended up leading to his downfall and eventually shifted his path to one that's now centered on writing and creativity. Along the way, Robert shares insights and advice for others who are still trying to figure out what they want to do with their careers. Thank you so much for listening. Welcome to the Impostor Syndrome Files. My name is Kim Menninger, and as an executive coach and former high-tech leader, my personal mission is to help professionals overcome imposter syndrome so that you can advance your career with confidence. Each week, I interview a new guest who brings a powerful perspective to this conversation, including personal stories, best practices, and new insights. The more we talk about this issue, the more we destigmatize imposter syndrome, recognize that we're not alone, and empower ourselves to access the tools and resources that can help us and those around us. Thank you so much for listening and for sharing with others you think would benefit from this conversation. It is so nice to meet you, Robert. I cannot wait for this conversation. I think it's going to be a little bit different than my usual conversations on this topic. And so I would love to start by inviting you to introduce yourself.
I think crazy might be the better word for this conversation. My name is Robert Kerbeck, and I am the author of a brand new memoir called Ruse, Lying the American Dream from Hollywood to Wall Street. And it is the true story, my true story, of how a wannabe actor became the world's greatest corporate spy.
And I just think there's something really compelling about that term corporate spy that, certainly piqued my interest when I read about you. And so I want to start at the beginning. How did you get to that place? Talk us through your career path.
Some high schools have home economics class or wood shop. Our school had a corporate spying program. No, of course not, right? It's insane. The story's insane. Basically, I'm from Philadelphia, and the Kerbeck family, my family, my great-grandfather sold horse carriages before automobiles were invented. And then he switched to cars. My grandfather took over that business. My father took over that business, and I was supposed to take over that business. And when I was in college, I fell in love with acting. I wanted to move to New York to try to be an actor. But when I graduated college, I kind of didn't have the guts to do that. I didn't know anybody that had done that. I didn't come from an artistic family. So I went to work for my father at the car dealership, and I just found it wasn't for me. The kind of trickery of car sales, it just didn't feel right to me, which is, of course, pretty ironic when I moved to New York to try to be an actor, and I need a survival job, and I stumble into a job as a corporate spy. When I moved to New York, I didn't know anybody, and a college buddy of mine, his brother was in New York trying to be an actor. And I was with him one day, and he very quickly kind of mentioned this new job that he'd gotten. And then he shut up right away, like he knew he had said something he wasn't supposed to say. And I said, whoa, dude, help me out. I'm broke. I need a job. What is this job? And he very reluctantly got me an interview. I went to the Upper East Side, and your listeners probably know the Upper East Side is kind of the old money area of New York. It's kind of the fanciest part of New York. And I go to this doorman building. I was living in Hell's Kitchen in a cave with two other guys. And I go to this doorman building, beautiful building. I take the elevator up to the penthouse, and this woman opens the door. I remember she had a martini and a cigarette, but that just might be the writer in me slightly exaggerating. But whatever the case was, it was the nicest apartment I'd ever been into. It was spectacular, like out of an Architectural Digest magazine. So I knew whatever the woman was doing, it was lucrative. And she brings me in for this interview, the strangest interview I've ever had. She never asked me a question about my skills. She didn't ask to see the resume that I had brought with me. She just asked me some questions about my relationship with my father and how was he taking me not going into the family business? And the answer to that was not well. So I left very discombobulated, and but my buddy called me and he said, you got the job. And all of a sudden I felt very proud of myself. And he said, don't get too excited because she hires everyone because no one is able to do this job. And then very next day, I went out to Brooklyn, and this is the Brooklyn of the early 90s when the crack epidemic was hitting hard. It's not the Brooklyn of today with, hipsters with beards and coffee shops. This was Brooklyn when it was rough and dangerous. I go to this rundown building. I go all the way up, 4th floor walk up. I knock on this door. This attractive woman opens the door with an Irish accent and says, "You'll come to work in my bedroom." And to that point, I had no idea what the job was. I was single, so I wasn't too concerned. But she takes me into her bedroom where there's a futon on the floor and a desk. And she says, "Sit down at the desk." And she begins to explain that we use our acting skills using accents and fake personas to call major corporations and get people there to tell us things that they definitely should not tell us, to reveal secrets about their personnel, about their strategies, about their plans, so that we can then sell that information to our clients.
Wow. So what did it feel like to you once you found out what this job is going to look like? Did you have any doubts about doing that kind of work? Like, how did you process that information?
Yeah, I was kind of shocked, because I didn't really know what it was. I thought it was some sort of telemarketing, selling magazine subscriptions or something. But I was like, well, okay, let's try this out. And you know, back in the day, so remember before LinkedIn, and the New York Post, I think, described me as LinkedIn before LinkedIn was invented. So back in the day, there was no way for corporations to know who was at a firm, what the organizational chart looked like, and who the rock stars were within an organization, right? Obviously, everybody that goes on a job interview is going to say, "Oh, I'm the best person in my group. I'm number one in my group." But to be able to literally ascertain that, and something your listeners may not know, your listeners that work in corporate America, is that corporations rank their employees. They all rank their employees. They all have internal metrics that they use to rank their employees, and we would determine what those rankings were. So then our clients knew exactly who the top people were, who the rock stars were, who was number one on the sales team, who was number two on the trading team, who were the bankers that had the largest books of business, or who were just the best people in whatever department we were looking at. And so, as I started doing this, I rationalized it because, one, I was broke and needed a job. And two, I rationalized it that most of the information we were getting was designed to help people get a better job because, we were getting these org charts, we were putting them together, we were showing the rankings of who the top people were, and the top people were getting calls from other firms saying, "Hey, we know you're the number two person at this team. We know you're the rock star over there. We want to hire you away, and we're going to pay you more money to do that." And so I said, well, look, at the end of the day, that's capitalism. I'm helping people get a better job. And how could that be really a bad thing? Now, again, that was a rationalization because the means we were using to do this we were deceiving people, right? And so it for sure is a rationalization. It's not a career that I would recommend for anyone, but it was a hell of a crazy story.
Well, I'm curious, just as a side note, now that there is LinkedIn and a lot more information, are there still corporate spies? Are there still people who do the kind of work that you did?
Corporate spying is alive and well. For your listeners out there, if you're looking to pivot to a new career, email me, go to my website, robertkerbeck.com. You can directly email me and I will be more than happy to tell you how to do it. It's very lucrative, a little dangerous, but LinkedIn, as incredible as LinkedIn is, it still only has, and I'm just going to pick a number, 60 to 70% of the information on there is accurate at any given time about a particular firm, which means that 30 to 40% of the executives that work at a company aren't on LinkedIn, or their profiles are way out of date. And most of these people are the rock stars, right? They're the passive candidates. And all of my clients, who are the largest corporations in America, they're interested in the rock stars. And of course, if you're a rock star at a firm, you don't care about your LinkedIn profile. You're killing it where you are. You're the top person. You're being paid well. Everybody's treating you great. You're not worried about your next job opportunity because you're a star. And that's who the big firms are looking to poach, is those stars, because not only do those stars bring their talents and their skills, but they also bring clients, right? They bring their current firm's clients. They bring the other people at the firm that are their friends that are also rock stars, right? And so a lot of times, let's say your corporation is number 7 in a given market, right? If you take the top 1 or 2 people from the number 1 corporation or the number 2 corporation, you can literally flip those rankings, because that's how important talent is, right? You think about, I always use the analogy of football, right? How important the position of the quarterback is, right? If you can, the top quarterback at your big rival's a free agent, if you can sign that quarterback away, it can completely change your franchise. And you can just look at Tom Brady when he left the New England Patriots that were winning all those Super Bowls. Last time I checked, New England has not won a Super Bowl since. I don't even know if they've made the playoffs. Maybe made the playoffs once. And then Tom Brady goes to Tampa Bay, they win a Super Bowl. It's the same thing in corporate America. If you take a rock star away from Apple or Google or Goldman Sachs or Pfizer or whatever the firm is, you take rock stars away from that firm and you get them for your firm, it is guaranteed adding hundreds of thousands of dollars, and in some cases, believe it or not, billions of dollars to your firm's bottom line.
So it makes perfect sense. And I understand your justification too, thinking about really helping people to get a better job. What was it like in the day-to-day? Like, I would be afraid that someone's going to figure it out. I'd be terrified that I was going to break character, or that somebody's going to ask a question. Something was going to happen. I'd be in a constant state of anxiety. Obviously, you had acting abilities, and I would imagine there's some part of this that might even be fun. But how did it feel to play this role?
Well, this is Gerhard calling from the office in Frankfurt, Germany. We have the European Union regulators here this week, and we need some information from the States. Who doesn't want to talk to Gerhard from the Frankfurt office, right? Corporations now are huge. They have offices all over the world, Tokyo, Dublin, Frankfurt, right? So all of a sudden, you get this call from Gerhard. Oh, my God, Gerhard. Oh, this is so crazy. Hey, how's it going, buddy? And so you create this sort of a friendship, right? And we would use these accents and these characters to create a friendship where you became telephone buddies, where people enjoyed the conversation. And most times, not all times, but most times, they wanted to help you, because what are people in corporate America trained to do? Be a good teammate, right? And so we would take advantage of that kind of desire to have good corporate culture, and we would use that to our advantage.
And so I think it's interesting, because when you and I were communicating before we got to this conversation, you essentially refer to yourself as an actual imposter, right? We're talking about the imposter syndrome a lot in this conversation, but you actually were an imposter. And so how did you navigate that in terms of, like, at what point did you decide, I'm not doing this anymore? Were there ever any points when you felt like, ooh, I don't know if I can continue to do this?
Yeah, I mean, it was always a challenge ethically, and for a long time, I rationalized it because we were getting, and this is going to sound pretty hilarious, we were getting $8 an hour to do this job when we first started. So, it's not like we were doing it to get rich per se. It was just to pay the bills so we could be an actor, so I could be an actor. And of course, I was going to be a famous actor. And what happened was I was a working actor. And your listeners can Google me and see that I did, 50 major TV shows. Every major TV show of the 90s and early aughts I did. ER, NYPD Blue, Chicago Hope, Star Trek, Melrose Place. I was doing lead roles on these shows. And so the job was always temporary. And that was another way how I justified it. It was temporary. It was almost always, I was almost always done with it. You know what I mean? Because I was making more and more money as an actor. And in the late 90s, I booked 4 different TV pilots, and none of the pilots got picked up. And all of a sudden, like, it seemed, very quick that this happened, that all of a sudden all the wind went out of kind of my acting sales, and my career basically stalled. And all of a sudden, now I was married and looking to start a family, looking to buy a house. And that was the moment where I kind of, crossed over to the proverbial dark side, where I went, look, I need to make money. This job is very lucrative. I'm incredibly good at it. People were throwing money at me. They were begging me to do the job. And that was the period in the early 2000s leading up to the crash where, again, LinkedIn had not been invented. And this intelligence that was not just organizational charts, it was also companies, their plans, their strategies, their new products, anything and everything that a competitor would want to know to get a competitive advantage. And that was the moment where all of a sudden my income ratcheted up. It was exponential increases to the point where towards the end I was making $2 million a year as a corporate spy.
Wow. And then you and I talked a little bit about this too. Really, the big turning point was the crash, right? So how did that affect your career path?
Well, so, obviously the crash occurred, and then corporations were no longer so interested in what their competitors were doing. They were just interested in surviving, right? Because we know many, many big firms went under, many other firms were bailed out. So they stopped spending money on spies. So all of a sudden I had no income, I had a mortgage, and I had to take a job in corporate America. And I went to work for a major executive recruiting firm based out of Hong Kong. It was my first job in corporate America. And what I was shocked to find out was that the lying done in corporate America, face to face, seemed to me to be far worse than the lying that I had done on the telephone. If I hope your listeners do pick up my book Ruse, and if they do and they're reading it and they're kind of getting upset at me because I'm tricking this person and rusing that person, don't worry, readers. When I go to work for corporate America, I go from the ruser to the rusee. I become the victim. I become the dupe. I'm the one that gets taken advantage of. And so I think a lot of readers, I know they enjoy that because all of a sudden they see this guy who's sort of the master deceiver. And all of a sudden I'm the one that's being deceived because I was under the mistaken apprehension that my teammates, we were all pulling together. We were all working together. We were all trying to do our best to benefit the company. And what I didn't realize was everybody was just interested in their own path, their own advancement, their own bonus check. And people were willing to do whatever they could, to advance themselves, often at the expense of other people. And that was the thing that I kind of didn't realize how cutthroat the corporate world could be.
And what did that do to you when you realized it?
It was demoralizing. It really was because, here I had taken this job. Obviously, I needed the job to not go broke. And, I just thought, like, if I worked hard and I did my best for the company and that meant the company did better, that meant everybody at the corporation would do better. And I thought that was what the purpose was, and what I began to find is that everybody was concerned just about their own individual path, how much they were going to make, what their next job was going to be, if they were going to get the promotion over you. And so there was this competitiveness that was not really about the best interest of the corporation. It was the best interest of the individual. And that was something that I was trying to, do the best for the corporation. And it took me a long time to realize that. And by the time I realized that, they fired me.
So that was going to be my next question, because I just think it's so interesting, the contrast between this world in which the point is to be deceptive, right? The point is to lie and get this information in these different devious ways. And then there's almost like this innocence that you brought to this corporation and this disillusionment that followed. And then I was going to ask you, did you go into if you can't beat them, join them mode? How did you end up navigating that? But it sounds like you never had a chance to even make that transition. What was the firing? What did they fire you for?
Well, I think, I did an interview, and one woman said, she described me as the nicest corporate spy you'll ever meet, which was a very sweet thing for her to say. But I think the idea was I always drew a line with the job, that the rusing was my job. But in my personal life, in my daily life, in my real life, I tried to be honest, straightforward, good person, right? And so when I went to work for this corporation, that's what I was trying to be: honest, straightforward, good. and it just was not, at least, certain industries are more competitive than other industries. Obviously Wall Street, technology, very competitive. But I think most of corporate America, I think most of your listeners can relate to corporate politics, and to, you've got to play that game, and a lot of playing that game, that Game of Thrones, analogy, let's say, where if you're not on the offensive, you've really got to look out for your best interests. And when they fired me, I definitely went into sort of a depression and had the proverbial midlife crisis. And at one point I sat down and I actually wrote a suicide note. But it wasn't me writing a suicide note. It was this character that kind of came through me. And I had been an English major in college before I got into acting. And all of a sudden I wrote this, basically a short story. I read it to an actor friend of mine. He said, "That's a great story. You should write a book." And so I wrote a book with this kind of crazy character. And the book was terrible. But the character was great. And the story was very compelling. The writing was rough. And that was the moment I realized, wow, I have a certain ability to tell a story. I know what good storytelling is, but I needed to do some work on how do I make the writing around that story better. And that was when I started going to writing conferences. I formed a writers group here in Malibu where I live called the Malibu Writers Circle, and started writing short stories. To my great surprise, they started getting published. Every short story that I've written has been published. A magazine started asking me to write essays. All of a sudden, those essays got published. I wrote a play that got done in New York. And then all of a sudden, I started writing books, which now I've had 2 books published in the last 3 years. My book before Ruse was Malibu Burning, which was, again, a true story about the wildfire a few years ago. Your listeners may remember the wildfire that burned down half of Malibu. I fought the wildfire with my family. We saved our house, even though 17 of 19 on our street burned to the ground. And the LA Times asked me to write an essay about that. And then a publisher read that essay and they asked me to write that book. And then at one point I was at a writer's conference and I was reading an early excerpt from Ruse. I hadn't even thought about writing a book about the corporate spying. One of the reasons I didn't want to write it is I didn't want to get in trouble, as in go to jail for writing it, for the things that I had done in the past. And the people at the conference freaked out about the book. They said, "Oh my God, we didn't even know corporate spying existed. We all know the Russians spy on the Chinese spy on us, but most people had no idea major corporations are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to hire spies every year." And they said, "You got to write a book about this." And so I wrote the book. I timed it out so the statute of limitations had expired on any potential crimes. And now I've written this book, which now is in development for a TV series, which is pretty cool.
It's so fascinating because you had, if we sort of go back to the beginning, right? You were an English major, you fell in love with acting, you had this vision of becoming an actor. I'm curious if in retrospect, when you look back on the arc of your career, do you feel like you're finally where you were meant to be? Or do you feel like each one of those led you to this moment. You couldn't have gotten here had you not had all of these other experiences.
That's a great question, and I think both of those points you made are true, right? In other words, I've gone back to the very beginning where I started, but I could not have gotten there if I hadn't gone through all this stuff. As a young person, I was unable to sit still and write. So it's not like I'm like, oh boy, I should have sat, I should have done. I wasn't able to do it at that point, and I wasn't really interested in doing it. I wanted to get out. I wanted to meet people, and theater, of course, is a really wonderful collaborative place to interact with people and really get close to people and have a lot of great experiences. So being a writer is a much more of a solitary pursuit, which is something now as a older person, as a middle-aged person, sitting in a room for hours at a time, I'm able to do that now. But as a young person, I couldn't do that.
So what would you say are the big lessons or takeaways from your own journey? Like, is there anything that you think about as like, if you were going to give advice to other people that you would say you've taken away from your experience and would recommend other people think about as part of their journeys?
Yeah, I think the number one thing is take the journey you want to take, right? Go on the path that is exciting to you, is inspiring you, is firing you up. Because, if I had stayed with my father in the family car business, sure, I would have been a wealthy guy. Now it turned out that I'm sort of wealthy now anyway, right? From Gorp and Spine, which of course I had no idea was gonna come up. But go on the journey you want to go on, because as we saw recently with this terrible COVID experience, no day is guaranteed. And so if you don't do what you want to do, you don't want to turn around. Like, am I disappointed that maybe I didn't have a bigger acting career? Sure. But do I regret that? No, I don't have any regrets, because I was always doing what I wanted to do, and I think that's the big takeaway is we're all going to have life disappointments. We're all going to have things that don't work out the way we wanted to, but you don't want to have that big regret that there's that thing that you always wanted to do, but you didn't do. And I'm also here to tell you, because here I am publishing books, and I'm not a kid. It's never too late to do what you want to do. Right. And I think that's incredibly exciting, that it's never too late to take a path that maybe you didn't take before, but you can take it now.
That's a really good point, too. And I also want to acknowledge, just there were a couple of times when you talked about, now I have a mortgage, now I have a family, how much your own external circumstances influence your path as well. I would imagine, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but being an actor when you're single and taking those kinds of risks feels different from when you maybe have small children, or just different aspects of your lifestyle that take on new priority. So I think it's also helpful for people to think, if I, like you said, right, like, oh, if I don't feel like I can do it in this very moment, if I have this dream and I don't feel like now's the right moment, it doesn't mean that I have to give it up entirely.
Right, that's right. And also, writing, and this is just one example for writing, to write more than an hour or 2 hours a day in terms of kind of new writing, is a challenge. I mean, and sometimes I do it, but in general, I just try to write for an hour to 2 hours in the morning. And then I spend the rest of the day, maybe I'm editing something, maybe I'm working on an interview, a podcast, and so my point is, it doesn't take a lot of time away from your full-time job, away from your family. It doesn't take a lot of time. When I first started writing, I just said half an hour a day, half an hour each morning. I would get up a half an hour early, and I would mark that time. I would literally kind of keep track of it. And I'm here to tell you, a half an hour a day, 5 or 6 days a week, at the end of a year, you'll have a book. If you're looking to write a book, if you're looking to write your memoir, if you put a half an hour a day aside, and by the way, that could be anything. I want to learn to play guitar and write songs. Half an hour a day in a year, you will be a really solid guitar player writing songs. And those are just two examples.
That's a really good point, because I do think that a big point of resistance, or something that we think gets in our way, is time. And so everyone says, oh, I don't have time for that, right? But time keeps passing anyway. And I think if it is important to you, those small incremental chunks of time have that powerful cumulative effect as you're describing.
Yeah, somebody taught me that. I mean, I'm really grateful. That it takes, you set a goal, and then you only make yourself hit 80% of that goal, right? So let's say, I don't know, I want to write a certain amount per week, or I want to practice an instrument, or I want to learn a language, or I want whatever it is, right? And you say what you feel like you could comfortably commit to that. And then you cut that down to 80% of whatever that number is, right? So that it's much more doable, right? So and that might be working out. Like, I'm going to work out, 4 days a week. Okay, let's just say 3 days a week for now. You give yourself something so it's more manageable.
That's a really good idea. Yeah. Is there anything else on your horizon? Like, obviously you're very getting a lot out of your writing career, right? You're doing really well. Do you see any other careers in your future?
No, thank you. No, thank you. It's funny that a lot of people have reached out about this book I wrote, Malibu Burning, about this terrible wildfire. And obviously climate change is a big part of these wildfires, because, we have a drier planet. So, we have, the rising temperature, vegetation is drier. We don't have as much rain. And so these fires start, and they're very difficult to stop, right? And we've seen fires, not just in California, but we've seen them in Oregon and Washington and Colorado and New Mexico. People die, thousands of homes. We've seen them in Australia and Canada and Europe, right? And so, but, watching a film about climate change, oftentimes maybe not the most exciting film. And so a couple of people said, look, watching a film about Malibu burning and actually having interviews with celebrities that lost their homes, Miley Cyrus and Nick Nolte, and, who was the other guy who lives around the corner from me, Robin Thicke, the singer, the musician. So people reached out and said, hey, why don't you direct this movie? And so I kind of was interested, and I love the idea, and I love the idea of being of service. I write about wildfires to this day all the time, and I speak about wildfires all the time. But I found that the directing thing was not in my bag of tricks. It requires a tremendous, to put together a movie, you have to have so much patience, because there's, it's basically you're the CEO of basically a company. And it just was not in my, so that career is not a career that I'm going to be taking up.
Well, you obviously have some really exciting projects that you completed, and I'm sure you're going to have even more books and writing ahead. Where can people find you if they want to get more of you?
Yeah, I always tell people, go to my website, robertkerbeck.com. You can buy Ruse from anywhere you like to buy books. You can buy Malibu Burning. You can also see the trailer for Ruse, which will give you a sense of the TV series. You can also read other essays that I've written. And if you do go to the site, you can also email me directly from the site. I love to hear from people. So please, reach out. And again, for your listeners that are looking to pivot into corporate spying, just let me know, and I'll help you out as much as I can.
Thank you so much, Robert. And we'll link to that in the show notes as well, so that everybody has access to your website. And I just so appreciate your sharing your journey with us. It's fascinating. I can't wait to read your book. And just thanks so much for being here.
Oh, well, thanks for having me.
Thanks so much for listening to the Impostor Syndrome Files. If you would like to continue this conversation in a safe and trusted space, I would love for you to join my virtual discussion group every Thursday at 12 p.m. Eastern. For the past several years, the group has been limited to women, but it is now open, regardless of gender, to anyone who is interested in exploring and troubleshooting common workplace challenges, building better awareness of ourselves and others, and becoming more inclusive allies at work. Check out the show notes for more info on how to find us, and please join us next week for another episode of the Impostor Syndrome Files.